All right. Okay, we're going to get underway as it is 10 past and we don't want to waste everybody's time. But again, apologies on our behalf. There's just a few technical issues with starting, but we will get underway now. All right, so welcome to all of our attendees and our expert panelists to our Can My Next House Be Sustainable, Stylish and Bushfire Compliant webinar. My name's Emma and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. And today's webinar is going to be recorded, so you don't need to rapidly take notes or remember everything that the panelists have said. And just so you know, you can look back at some point if you'd like to. We can send you the link or snippets or whatever you need to know. But we're also recording to help us improve for next time. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of information that you may or may not know, but a research paper done by the University of Sydney says that the construction industry makes up of 18% of global emissions. That's, I think, fairly significant. So even though, and on that, even though Australia only makes up of 0.33% of the population of the globe, we are one of the highest emitting countries. So given that, that's obviously also feeding into why we're giving information in this presentation. So we're all aware of the intensity also of the bushfire season that's just been. So it's only natural to want to know, if I'm planning to build in a bushfire area, how can I make sure that I'm having a positive effect on the climate, but at the same time protecting my family from potential bushfires? So that is where our experts can help you understand how your next house can be sustainable, stylish and bushfire compliant. On the panelists, I just wanted to send apologies from Steve from Kingspan. He was unable to attend today due to unforeseen circumstances. But if you do have specific questions for him, happy to take those away, contact him, get any answers and come back to you with those at a later date. So he will not be here with us today. Before I do introduce you to the panelists that we do have today, I just wanted to talk to you about a few other housekeeping items during the webinar. There will be an opportunity to ask questions specific to the presentations throughout the webinar. So that will be through the Q&A box, which you may or may not have seen. I'll do my best to get to all of them and I will read them out live to the panelists at the end of their presentation so that we can get to them. If we don't, at the end, I'll do my best to ask them then. There's also going to be some polls throughout the presentation. So Corey, if you want to put up the first one, so you can see what we're talking about, and if possible, it'd be great if you could answer them, answer this poll. So this is just to help us understand why you're here, what you'd like to know more about, and how we can assist you further. And so hopefully that's pretty straightforward and easy to do while you're listening. And also note that you'll be muted throughout the presentations, just to help the presentations flow and we can get through it quickly. Okay, has everyone voted in our poll? Almost? 8 out of 10. Are the 2 extras you, maybe, Corey? Poll closed. And there's the results. Brilliant, easy. Professional development, interesting. Okay, alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our panelists. So first up, we have Control Line Consulting founder Craig Burley. He is a bushfire planning and design a level 3 certification, with Fire Protection of Association of Australia. He is the foundational member of the Bushfire Planning and Design Special Interest Group and the Technical Advisory Committee for Bushfire Safety within Fire Protection Association of Australia. My apologies, bit of a mouthful, that one. He's recognised as a fully qualified bushfire consultant by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. He has a postgraduate diploma for design in bushfire-prone areas, and he's got over 30 years of fire management and suppression duties within Australia, the United States of America, and Botswana in Africa. So a lot of experience. Fantastic person to have on the panel today. Craig, what can we expect from you in this webinar today?
Yeah, thanks, Emma, and thanks to the other panellists and the attendees here today. Good to have you all on board here. Clearly, trying to create a more resilient community from bushfire events is intrinsic to how we live nowadays. So hopefully out of today, we'll be able to give you a background to how we get to the point of the BAL assessments and so forth, just a brief background onto that, and then some tips as to what to expect at the various BAL levels for when you're building. Fortunately, I've been in the industry now since the inception of the accreditation, which started in a chap's lounge room over at Hornsby when we were all going through doing university, and we recognised that we needed to tidy up the industry, and that has then morphed into the accreditation process that's administered by the Fire Protection Association of Australia. I've been knocking around the bushfire world since 1981, and as Emma alluded to, I've got a reasonably good experience and exposure throughout certainly Australia, and work fires in every state apart from the Northern Territory, and also done a couple of operational tours across to America, and went up to Indonesia a couple of years back as an air attack supervisor working with the large air tanker program up there. So to anybody, please feel free to ask questions of us during the webinar or afterwards for sure. I'd love to hear from you all. Thanks, Emma.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks, Craig. All right, so then our next panelist is Corey from Corey Webb Design, and he is your bushfire house design specialist. He's got 18 years of experience with building design. His expertise lies in improving the quality and health of a home through sustainable and I can never get this word, design. You can explain to me, Corey. What are we going to expect from you today, Corey?
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone, for joining as well. Yeah, biophilic. How we can design by connecting inside of our house with outside, connecting with nature to actually help our health as well. So some of the things we're going to discuss today is how can I make sure that my bushfire house is actually sustainable? Or where do the two design principles of bushfire design and sustainability cross over? And is there any areas where I can maybe be above even that? And then what styles can I choose from if I'm going to design and build in a bushfire and sustainable way? Is it just one, or is there a few? And then also a key thing that a lot of people are interested in, because we've been stuck inside during this pandemic, is my house helping me to stay healthy, or is it doing the opposite? And how does good design relate to that? And then one of the key things that most people I talk to when we talk to them about bushfire and sustainable design is how much is it going to cost? How can I balance the costs of the functionality that I want and getting it to perform the way that I want as well? So we'll touch on those subjects today. Thanks, Emma. Hand back to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great. Okay, and our last panelist is Dimir Jurkovic from Split Building. He's the managing director, and he has more than 21 years of experience in building and carpentry. Dimir prides himself on building high quality, sustainable and luxurious homes with an acute attention to detail. Dimir, what can we expect from you today?
Oh, thanks, Emma. Thanks for the introduction and the panelists and people attending today. Yes, I guess I am the founder of Split Building, but I'm certainly not responsible for all the beautiful homes we've been creating. And I guess my purpose here today is to ensure I can provide you with some valuable information, as I'm not only passionate, but I'm slightly obsessed with building, but helping people is equally important. So after this presentation, yeah, don't hesitate to ask us as many questions as possible. And during this webinar, I'm hoping to share an insight to what we went through when we were building our own home in an FZ climate. And some of the questions I got asked a lot during was, how did I come up with my design? What materials, how did I work out what materials to use? And then how did I get around the constraints of building in a bushfire zone? And what does it feel like to live in an FZ home? So yeah, hopefully I can help you with some of those topics today.
Fantastic. All right, thanks, Demi. Okay, well, we'll hit off the presentations now. Craig is going to start. So Craig, I'll hand over to you. As I mentioned to our attendees, if you have any questions throughout, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end of Craig's presentation. Thanks, Craig.
Wonderful, thanks, Emma. Just before I slip into the more formal part or prepared part of the presentation, one of the things I'd love everybody to understand is that the guiding document that we work under is a document called Planning for Bushfire Protection. And this document was prepared by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. There was the 2001 version, and then the 06 version, and just recently the 2019 version is released. And that's the guiding document that gives us our direction for how we're going to proceed with trying to make the bushfire community more safe, more resilient, able to return to normality after a bushfire event. And the original document was written, or not only written, but mainly driven by a gentleman called Graham Douglas. And Graham is very much an environmentalist. He was our lecturer at uni, and his whole passion really is about the environment and having buildings that are able to withstand a bushfire event, but also built and designed in a holistic fashion in an ecologically sustainable way. And that's the basis behind it. And the ethos is build the building better, sacrifice some land around it, put infrastructure in that is suitable and resilient, and then let Mother Nature have a greater hand in dealing with the broader landscape issues. And that's the holistic thought process behind planning for bushfire protection, being very much a ecologically driven document. So I'll just flick over to the PowerPoint here for you. I've prepared. We're not going to kill you on PowerPoint, but I'm just going to run through basically where we end up, how we end up with the outcomes and the inputs to it. And they're not just restricted to construction. And this little diagram here, we actually designed that in our first university course back in '03. And the inputs clearly there shown to affect and mitigate the bushfire behaviour are the building and construction, for sure, the landscaping around your building, the emergency management, and a lot of what we would have heard during the last fire season was messages from the Rural Fire Service and the fire authorities about what to do during those bushfire events. The adequacy of the water supplies and utilities, being electricity, gas, access and egress we consider as well, and the asset protection zone, the area of the landscape around your building and how that's managed. Now, that distance of management will vary for every site, but we try to achieve a level of exposure that keeps a new building out of flame contact. Whereas we do understand, though, that there's existing parcels of land, such as Demir's, where you're not able to achieve that distance of separation from the vegetation hazard, and we end up in those higher levels of exposure. The key point and the starting point for all this, and people say, when do I have to consider bushfire as being a part of the development application process? And here is just a quick sample of what they call the bushfire prone land map. And that's the legislative trigger that forces the councils to consider bushfire within the development application process. And essentially this map runs for about 90% of New South Wales, and it maps the vegetation. And in this case here, the red is the vegetation, and that's the category 1 vegetation, the highest you can get. And then it puts a buffer around that vegetation for 100 metres in the case of category 1, so that buildings then within that 100 metres are expected to feel some radiant heat. They're going to feel some embers, and closer towards the hazard, they're also going to experience some flame contact. So out to 100 metres currently is the distance, and if your allotment is captured or partially captured by that buffer zone, or is maybe within the category 1 veg or the vegetation itself, that's the legislative trigger that says you need to get a bushfire assessment done within the context of your development application process. Just another sample here. This is a smaller, more discrete parcel of riparian vegetation. Is not going to produce the same fire behaviour as a category 1. It's a category 2 or a category 3. And so then it only buffers it for 30 metres. So the system tries to limit the areas that of development that is captured, but tries to seek some sort of common ground and to capture some, but not all. As a sidebar comment, there is talk through the Royal Commission that the buffer zones should be actually expanded out to 150 metres, but whether that happens or not is another thing. So in terms of the process for how we assess a development, and this diagram is a takeout of the current Planning for Bushfire Protection 2019, and I'll just walk you through it. And up at the left-hand side of the diagram there, you can see your house that you're proposing to build, and then the area of separation, or the distance of separation, is shown there as being the potential asset protection zone, and then the area of hazard. So to establish what our bow level is going to be, we look at where the development is located, the separation and distance, or asset protection zone achievable distance. We then look at the hazard and what sort of hazard that is. And that's divided up into about 8 different groupings for all the vegetation in New South Wales. And then we look at the slope through that vegetation. When we look at those input factors, and obviously for every different site they're going to be different, we then end up with a bow level, a bushfire attack level. There's 2 different methods for assessing what that bow level is and the outcome for it. And that being the most simplistic fashion, which is what we call a method 1 analysis. And clearly we just look at separation distances, the type of vegetation. It works off a simple table and ends up with a bow. Or we can use what's called a method 2 analysis, where we're trying to really fine-tune that assessment process, where there's factors that need to be taken into account. The actual slope may be such that we want to look at that in the context of a specific site. Maybe the fuel loadings out in the vegetation hazard area are such that they need to be further analysed, because different vegetation has different fuel loadings and may not, in a specific instance, be pertinent for the vegetation grouping that arises out of a method 1 analysis. There may be a variation in the flame width that's going to approach your house. The method 1 assumes 100 metres, but in some circumstances it may only be 20 metres of potential flaming front coming towards your building. So therefore we can run it through some software programs and come up with a more detailed analysis for a specific site if that's indeed required. To go through that process, you must actually be a qualified level 3 consultant. The level 2s and the level 1s are fine to do the method 1 analysis, but you do need to hold the level 3 qualification to start bearing those input factors. And then we end up with the bow levels, and that stands for bushfire attack level. And quite often I get asked, what do the numbers mean that are beside the bow level? So they seem to be randomly selected numbers, and people quite often say, what do they mean? And what they actually represent is the radiant heat exposure that your building is likely to experience on a per square metre basis. So in the lower levels at BAL 12.5, your wall that is facing the hazard is likely to experience a maximum of 12.5 kilowatts per metre squared of radiant heat. And then working through, as we get a little bit further up, BAL 19, BAL 29 being a maximum of 29 kilowatts, BAL 40, and then BAL flame zone. Now, BAL flame zone is pretty self-explanatory. Your house may be fully immersed in flame contact, and actually in BAL 40, at the higher end of the BAL 40 scale, we can see some flame contact arising there as well. In the BAL 12.5, you're going to start to experience a member attack, and we start protecting the building at that lower level specifically for ember attack. And it's important that we do even at those lower levels of exposure, because 60 to 70% of all houses don't burn down from direct flame contact or high levels of radiant heat. They actually burn down from ember attack. That small section that ignites is not put out because maybe there's no fire appliance or homeowner in attendance, and the house burns to the ground. BAL 19, we're starting to see some increase in radiant heat, but not exorbitant at all, but certainly significant ember attack, and the ember protection runs the whole way through. BAL 29 is the objective of planning for bushfire protection for maximum exposure for your building. That's where, when we're doing subdivisions, we must only have building envelopes that are BAL 29. That's the primary objective of planning for bushfire protection regulatory process, is to try and have no more building platforms created higher than BAL 29. Up at that BAL 29, you've still got a good flexibility in terms of your building materials. You can use timber, but it must be a hardwood treated timber, and non-piloted ignition is not likely to be experienced. That is, you need to have a flame hit that building element for it to ignite. The radiant heat itself won't cause ignition. And therein lies the difference when you move into BAL 40, that there is likely to be non-piloted ignition of the building elements, i.e. no flame contact, just radiant heat levels as such that the building element may start to combust. And therefore there is, under most building elements, no allowance for putting timber into BAL 40, and certainly not in BAL flame zone, albeit there are a couple of timber window products that are tested out there to BAL flame zone. The mechanisms of attack, just in summary: smoke, the flame contact, radiant heat, embers, and a really important one is wind. I remember actually when I was in Botswana and we were sitting having a beer one night after training some firefighters over there, and one of my colleagues who'd worked on the bushfire assessments, the building assessments down in Victoria, who told me of a building that they came across, and the whole roof, this is from the Black Saturday event, the whole roof of the house had been lifted off and put on the ground beside the house. And when they inspected the site, they found that underneath the roof, the whole ground was completely unburned, which led to the conclusion that the wind event prior to the flame arriving, the fire front arriving, had lifted the roof off, ripped the roof off the building and put it on the ground. That's ahead of the fire. So that's certainly that wind event is significant. We saw that numerous times during the last fire season, this just the past summer, where we were getting significant wind as being a significant form of attack and driving the fires as such as well. So that's a significant component of how we of what we need to do in terms of protecting our building from those elements as such. And I'm just going to stop sharing here now and just come back to a little bit of face-to-face. So when you're trying to move into the building space and you're in bushfire-prone areas, strongly advise that first and foremost, if you're looking at a parcel of land, whether it's for self or another qualified bushfire consultant, there's quite a few of us out there now, really start to consider that first up, even before you buy. Get a bushfire attack level assessment done to establish what level of exposure you're at, so that when you're looking at designing your house, planning the costing, that you're forearmed as to what level you can be expected to try and achieve. Certainly the graph in terms of building costs starts to increase once we go to BAL 12.5, gradually 19. It's a little bit steeper at 29, but exponentially starts to really ramp up once you move into BAL 40 and BAL flame zone. And therefore you need to be forearmed as to how to, you know, what your designer can do, what your budget can do, but also what level of exposure you're prepared to accept yourself in terms of where you want to sit on that bad summer's day. Are you wanting to be in that level of exposure as such? So it's really an important decision-making process, and that should start when you start to look at your parcels of land. And we offer that service as well as part of the consultancy industry. And most of the consultants are offering pre-purchase inspections now. In terms of building design and cost, certainly the BAL 12.5 area is realistically, in most contexts, the typical Australian home. It's going to have screens on the windows, draft excluders on the doors, and in the basics configuration and the energy efficiency of the house, probably not a great deal of difference in the BAL 12.5. Starts to ramp up a little bit with BAL 19, and as I mentioned, in the 29, you're looking at a restriction then in your windows, but not a lot. Glazing into the BAL 29 is realistically 5mm toughened glass for your windows. And within those first three areas, there's quite a good range of products out there in the market, for sure, that allow you a good deal of flexibility and choice in your design and what you'd like to use to create that aesthetic place that you want to live in. However, once you move into BAL 40, it gets a little bit less restrictive, albeit there's some pretty good range of products out there that will satisfy the building code requirements. However, once you move into the BAL flame zone area, it is reasonably restrictive. You're looking at only a limited number of wall situations or solutions. I've sort of steered down the path of masonry type products. There is some building products out there now that will satisfy the flame zone requirements apart from a masonry configuration, but they are limited. And certainly in the window shutter type area of your building, it's very limited. At this point in time, there would be only, by my knowledge, two window manufacturers that fully comply with BAL flame zone window systems without a shutter. There's a few shutter systems now that are still reliant on a BAL 40 window beneath their shutter. And as I understand, there's only 2 shutter systems that are fully compliant with BAL flame zone itself, so that you can use whatever window you wanted underneath at all. But we're certainly only too happy to expand on that. And if you'd like to post up any questions, we can steer you towards some more detail in that area. But that's about it for me, Emma, and thank you very much.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Craig. That's a lot of information. I know it's been really informative for me. We do have a few questions. So, however, we are running out of time because we did start late. So I will ask a couple of questions, Craig, if that's okay, but just be mindful of the time. So one of the first questions is, what do the bower numbers mean? Now, after listening to your presentation, you said that that's bushfire attack level, but is the numbers, is it a measurement, or is it, can you explain that just a little bit further?
Sure. Sorry, Emma, I thought I touched on that before, but the numbers represent a radiant heat level.
Radiant
heat. Now 12.5, you're going to experience up to 12.5 kilowatts worth of radiant heat against that element of the building that faces the hazard. About 40 kilowatts, 29.19 in the middle there.
Okay, just another quick one. Does my garage need to be the same bower rating as my house?
If your garage is attached to your building, yes, it needs to be the same level as your house. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and this is an interesting one. One of our attendees has asked, do you know if home insurers view higher bower rated zones less favourably, e.g. like have higher rates, higher premiums rather, for insuring that home if it's FZ compared to 12.5?
Certainly after the last few years, we are seeing the insurance industry start to move into this area and starting to evaluate different districts and different houses under a bower type system and adjusting their policies and premiums accordingly. I don't think all of them are, but an ever increasing number. And after losing 2,000 odd homes in New South Wales this past fire season, I would imagine that most of the underwriters are looking at that quite seriously.
Okay, all right, we won't move on to the next presentation. There is another question, but we might answer that later. So I'll hand over now to Corey. I'll let you take it away. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Craig. That was really awesome presentation. So let's dive into some of those questions that we were going to talk about. How can we make sure that a bushfire compliant house is actually sustainable, and where do those design principles actually cross over? So I'll share my screen and run through a few of those points. So first of all of us are seeing that there's a need to make a personal contribution to change the effect they're having on the climate. And also we want to be more and more resilient to the fire seasons, the extreme weathers that we're facing all over Australia. But some of the basic strategies of what sustainable design includes are these three, and you can Google it and study it and find out a lot more detail on this, but some of the basic ones are: reduce the consumption of non-renewable resources, minimize the waste, so both before in the design stage, during construction, and then also when we're living in the house, and then to create healthy and productive environments. As Craig's described there, this is one of the legislative tools to sort of outline or prescribe what is bushfire compliant design, this Australian standard. So one of the first areas that we're going to touch on, as mentioned, was where the design principles of bushfire compliant and sustainable design crossover. And you can see on your screen an image there showing one of the things that actually works against us in both sustainable and bushfire design is having large gaps around a house. So we can see in the image on the right, large gaps between the wall and the soffit. On the left, image shows large gaps between the window and the wall. And this is basically letting in a lot of and out air from our building. A guiding principle in bushfire design is that you don't want to have a gap of 2 millimeters in your house, let alone these sort of large ones, because that means an ember could fly inside your house and start your house catching on fire. So that cross over really well with sustainable design, because you probably know that 40% of your energy bill comes from heating or cooling your house. And the main way that we can waste heating or cooling is by doing the same thing, having large gaps in the outside envelope of our house. So that can let the cool air in when we're trying to keep it warm, or it can do the opposite. So this is a really good way that they work hand in hand by building to these tight tolerances. At Corey Web Design, we also encourage people to build it even a little bit higher than the building standard, because the building standard doesn't touch on really thermal bridges. What that means is it's like a physical pathway from outside of your house to inside of your house through which heat can move easily. So, for example, a window frame, a metal window frame, if that doesn't have inbuilt thermal break, it can allow the heat to flow into your house. That can result in mold, condensation, draft, and other things that discomfort. We'll just share the results of that polling. So we can see that most of us are interested in bushfire compliant designs. That's good. That's what we're talking about. Just to go on to the next, just a little practical design tip for when we are working on our existing house or our new house, is to use high quality door seals on the external doors and windows, especially doors, because that will reduce the air leakage from your house design. Internal doors have an undercut often because there's ventilation flowing around your house from different rooms, but the external doors are really important to seal. Secondly, is talk to your designer about how to remove thermal bridges in your house design. It could include insulating your concrete slab edge. It could, and we encourage highly, using high quality window systems that have inbuilt thermal breaks. So that just basically means in the window frame there's either rubber gasket or an air gap or timber in there that stops the flow of heat transferring through your building. Window design also is a second area where they cross over. So windows obviously are very vulnerable in a bushfire situation, as Craig has mentioned. And so really the old traditional single glazed aluminium windows that we probably all grew up with, just sometimes they just don't cut it, and especially not in bushfire compliant houses. Some of the basic principles is that we don't want our window frames to be combustible. We want the gaps around the windows to be well sealed, and sometimes we might leave the window open, but we'd have to have a wire mesh in there to stop embers getting in, or in some cases using bushfire shutters. So how does that work with sustainability? Well, sustainable design, you really want to have high quality glazing because having single glazed windows can really just transfer the heat and the cold through our building so easily. So tip one with practical design tips is use triple glazing, or at the very least double glazing, to control the thermal quality in your house. Your automatic reaction probably is, that's too expensive, I can't do it. And so the other tips there is how to balance the cost. How can I do this to actually balance the costs of using these higher spec windows? So in tip two, balance the cost of these windows by really limiting the window size to just what's needed. Now, your house or site might face a particular view, so take advantage of it with a big window. But in less high priority rooms, just have the size window that you need and limit the size to what's really needed. Third, there it says that fixed windows are about 30% cheaper than operable. So we don't want to have a house full of fixed windows because we don't have natural ventilation, but where we can at times use them, they can really bring the cost down. And then also in our designs, think about, instead of having 3 windows in a wall or in a room, just use one bigger window, because of the amount of labour that goes into installing the windows actually pushes the cost up quite a bit if you've got a lot of smaller windows rather than one bigger one. So let's look at our third area of bushfire shutters, and we'll have a look at a working example of how bushfire shutters actually work as a design principle sustainably really well. So this is Folding House that we're working on up in Glenbrook. It's about 2 or 3 months away from construction starting up there. It's got a west-facing view, which normally you avoid west-facing windows like the plague. because you know the summer sun comes belting in, heats up your house, and you've created a little oven. So what we've done to mitigate that, we've put on 2-metre eaves on the west-facing windows. We've got obviously large windows to take advantage of it. Then a pergola with terrace, and then motorised mesh screens that will drop down that also act as insect screens. And then also the bushfire shutters. So we'll just show you an internal view here. You can see that it's got the large west-facing windows out to the right there. Another view of the kitchen. So there's a large open space with a large expanse of west-facing windows. Now we'll go out to the deck. So in summer, when the sun's going to come down and hit these windows, it's going to heat up the house. But when you close the bushfire shutters, all of a sudden it's got this huge barrier to the heat getting in your house. And the way that this controls the sun is even more efficient than triple glazed windows having bushfire shutters. So in this house, we've actually got a balance of bushfire shutters with flame zone windows and with double glazed windows to be able to balance out how the house will work thermally and to really optimize it. Also, you can automate your bushfire shutters to make sure that the weather, as the sun goes around your house, and on certain days you have sensors inside, so it'll automatically close and open to keep your house at an optimal temperature. As Craig's mentioned already, we don't need bushfire shutters on Bell 29 because the windows will perform adequately. And then tip 2 is that there isn't any skylights that are certified in Australia for Bell flame zone. So when you're doing your initial planning, make sure you've got all your rooms around with access to an external wall so you can get natural light in, because you can't use a skylight. And then we'll just skip quickly through some of the different styles that you can have. It's not just one set style that you have to have for a bushfire house. Here we've got a modern house this DA was just approved 3 weeks ago. And it's like got a real clean, modern palette, hip roofs, pretty sort of standard construction. One that's under construction now at Grossvale is a Hampton style, so it's got like a beach vibe to it, white on white sort of styling, rustic sort of interior features. And then the house that we've just been talking about, Folding House, is contemporary. This is a glass pavilion, and one of the key features on this sort of style house is that the materials selected are going to look better with age. So the stone is going to look better. The Core-10 cladding and screens will look better. And another material that is often used is zinc in really ultra high-end houses. But choosing materials that age actually improves them is a real nice feature in contemporary houses. And we'll look at soon as well, Demir's house. We didn't design this one, but it's got some really excellent design, minimalist design, and it's got polished concrete, like simple, clean, geometric forms, really high quality sort of build. So just skip through those quickly just to show that we can be able to achieve like quite a number of different styles in bushfire compliant and sustainable design. Now we'll just touch on very briefly cost, just to balance out the functionality that we want to include in our houses and the cost of it. Some practical design tips is pay a builder to be involved in the design process. He'll be able to help guide you to get your budget to where you need it to be, and also reduce costly variations because he was involved in the design decisions. And then tip 2 is think about the cost that your building is going to have through its whole life. Not the construction cost, but how much is it going to cost you to run for 20 years of the life that you live in it. Sustainable inclusions like solar panels, high quality windows, sometimes they can take only up to 5 years to pay for themselves through the reduced energy bills that you get. So it's really worth considering that whole cost, because the initial construction cost is only about 15% generally of the whole life of a building. The time that you can really make the best decisions and have the greatest effect on the whole life of building costs is at the design stage. So talk to your designer. It doesn't have to be me, but talk to them about how can I make sure I get natural ventilation, natural lighting, good quality insulation that's appropriate to my site location, the right type of window, because different glazing work in different locations, and to be able to help reduce the running costs of my house, because it reduces it exponentially. Just to finish off, we've seen the climate change and the extreme weather events that are related to bushfires, and that's very obvious, that link. And it would be illogical in the design of our homes to ignore these two critical issues of bushfire compliant design and sustainability. So Corey Web Design, in hosting this webinar, we'd love it if just one person made a more sustainable design choice after viewing this webinar. That would be worth it for us. Thanks so much for listening. We'll hand back to Emma.
You need to unmute.
Oh, sorry all. Thanks, Corey. That's fantastic. Lots of really fantastic information and images of houses. The potential is, yeah, lots of potential to build whatever you really want. There is one question, and it is about cost, but maybe we'll touch on that at the end. Just I'm conscious of the time, so I might hand over to Demir to do your presentation, and then we'll maybe try and address the questions at the end. Just quickly before Demir starts, there is an exiting poll that we want you guys to answer. So please, if you can, stay past one so you can answer the poll after Demir's presentation. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Demir. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks guys for sticking around for so long. And yeah, look, I try my best to address that insight that Corey was trying to give everyone when we were building our house. So I'll just run through all those questions I had that I wanted to answer for people. And I do also have a bit of a presentation here. So I'm going to share the screen, find that presentation, and hit the share. Hopefully things are going to happen in a minute. And it will be not that one, but that one. How's that? Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, okay. I think I'll start at the start. Sorry. I guess as one of the most leading questions was, how did we come up with a design? Being one of the most memorable questions I've got, I can say for me, look, I already knew a lot about putting a building together, but when it came to actually getting it ready and presented for DA and needing some really incredible details added to it, I needed to turn to an architect or a designer. And then after interviewing a few, I met up with one architect, and it was an interesting conversation because basically 8 hours later that night, we had, a pretty good outcome. Maybe about 80% of that planning was done, which was pretty incredible, and it gave me a whole another level of appreciation for architects and designers. So that was actually a really good experience. So I loved it. Yeah. So what you can see here is an inspirational picture on the right-hand side. I just picked that out from an Instagram. So thanks Instagram and whoever designed it. And there was a floor plan up there on the top left, and then on the bottom there on the left-hand side, you'll see some of the results from the actual night spent with the architect. So going to the next slide, here is a bit of a bird's eye view of what we're facing when it came to designing in the bushfire area. You can see that, the house is on an upslope, surrounded by a thick bush. So I just lost myself here a little bit. So I guess, yeah, I had a lot of thinking to do when designing this home, and there was a lot of different choices in building materials that I had to make. the primary building materials that I was thinking about from the start was tilt panels, SIPS panels. So that's a structurally insulated panel. There was a product called Dinsel, or there's double brick render, or brick veneer, or just a cladding that goes over your timber frame. But the way I had to work it out was to make sure that I could afford it as well. So I had to break down all the materials into like a square meter component, and see if we could, get it into some kind of a budget that we had in our head. So when I was thinking about tilt panels, I did end up shying away from the tilt panels because I just thought, due to the cost and difficulty in obtaining the right finishes, the expansion joints were a little bit of a put off, and I wanted an industrial looking place, but in residential construction, I didn't think it really offered the detail that I was looking for. And I was also a little bit scared of a tilt panel falling on us and maybe killing us. So there was a bit of a safety aspect there when it came to tilt panels. So SIPS panels was interesting. It came as a product to me by an architect, and it was a pretty hot contender, but there was a certification issue that we had, not being able to get a certification in time for the build, which put us off a little bit because we wanted to just get stuck into the building process straight away. So I had to look at other products. Dinsel came to mind, which is a plastic form, which is widely used in Europe, and now making its way into Australia, commonly used in basements and rainwater tanks and underground tanks and so on. What I thought wasn't going to be feasible when you worked it out, in Europe, they're putting up these panels without putting steel reinforcement inside them. In Australia, we just can't get them approved without putting reinforcing inside these actual plastic forms. And to me, I just thought, well, if I needed the speed to make it cost efficient, and I just didn't think I could get there. So I looked at double brick, which was a good idea. Brick veneer, something more I'm familiar with. But I was looking for a particular exterior finish, which meant that I needed to render it and put some grooves in it. And I thought that would have been a little bit tedious to get perfect. So therefore I started looking for a cladding. And there's plenty of choices out there, and I ended up settling for an MGO product, which has got a pretty good fire resistance level. It's quite easy to install, and it's quite nicely finished. So just there's the product there. Sorry, I'm going a bit slow with the slides. So I'll keep moving through. I guess the other questions were, how did I get around the constraints of building in a bushfire? Look, at first I believed I would have been building a concrete bunker, but that soon changed after researching the different options. And with our development, it wasn't long before we could understand that our bushfire home wouldn't be totally destroyed by the constraints. With smart planning and the additional cost to comply, it wasn't too bad to tolerate either. So to get the whole picture of how and what to include, we were encouraged to get a full fire report rather than to do a self-assessment of the power rating, which was a blessing after meeting Craig Burley. And in his report, with much experience, basically outlined all the requirements, which was backed up by the Australian standards. This must have also improved our chances with council immensely, because we didn't have any questions when it came time to get our house inspected. So yeah, thanks, Craig. That was amazing. There's a bird's eye view again from the back of our house, and I guess for us, there was some really hard parts to try and understand when selecting materials, and that was some grey areas with compliance. We found that you can refer to the BCA for materials, but what you will do is come across some compliance issues where, say, for example, your bushfire shutters, the BCA will tell you that you can actually use, this and that material to build a bushfire shutter, but compliancing is another level where when you're talking about having to get your product tested, there were figures thrown at us of around about $100,000 per material, and I just thought that wasn't feasible. So instead of making up our own bushfire shutters, we just bought something off the shelf. It's got that certificate to say that it's bushfire compliant, it's been tested. Our certifier was very happy with that certificate, and there was no questions asked, which made the whole process of getting the building approved a lot easier. So that was our experience with certification. I guess the other question is, what does it feel like living inside a BAL FZ home? Well, I guess it's hard to really compare when you've got basics kind of dictating or controlling your inside environment for sustainability. And so we went from a home that was built probably 5 years ago to our house now. And pretty much all I could say is that I've had a lot of comments from people who have walked inside the house in summer and have gone, wow, it's a nice, cool house. But I'd say that's probably due to, the cladding, it's well insulated, the high ceilings and so on. So, yeah, overall, look, I'm pretty happy about the challenge that we took on building this house. We've definitely learned a lot. I do think that you can build a beautiful home, even though, you've got these restrictions on materials. It's all just about working in with your architects, designers, and other professionals to try and achieve a great outcome. So, yeah, all right. So, well, that's it for me. We've got some following results there again. Okay, yeah, the cost can be extra, but I guess with clever design, you can try to minimize that as much as possible. So, but yeah, I can't say enough for the planning process. If you can get that right, working with your builders to ensure that you're not going to go over budget, you should be able to come up with some really good compromises and enjoy living in, our heavily bushed areas. And the Blue Mountains is one of those, which is quite incredible to live in. So back to you, Emma.
Fantastic. Thank you, Demir. If you can stop sharing your screen, that would be great. Corey has just put up the exit survey. So if you all could answer that, that would be fantastic. There is a couple of other questions, but if you do need to go, we really appreciate your time and coming to listen to the panelists. We hope you gain some really valuable information, and we hope to see you next time. Yeah, don't forget the exit survey, but I'll just go to the questions. So what are some BAL FZ rated roofing products? Demir, Craig, Corey, which one of you wants to answer?
Yeah, I'll go for it. Well, you can pretty much build anything FZ with the use of tiles or tin. It's just what is placed underneath the actual structure, which will stop embers from coming through, which gives it that rating that's required. So, yeah, I don't think there's too much limitation in design. It's just what goes underneath that's, to be looked at.
Fantastic.
In that BAL FZ space, the roof needs to be tested in compliance with an Australian test standard of AS 1530.8.2, which is a very high level of testing, or there is a methodology within the Australian standard, Appendix I test, and that uses a plywood component within the construction. Our industry, the FPA Association, the FPA, doesn't support that methodology. There's no quality assurance given to the actual plywood that's put in. There's no standard for that. You could buy some very cheap plywood that may delaminate after a few years. Certainly the systems that are compliant with 1530.8.2 would be our recommendation for flame zone. Beneath that, there's some, down at BAL 12.5, your standard house basically will satisfy the requirements, for building in the bushfire prone area in that lower level. Standard construction techniques. No gaps. That's the biggest thing, no gaps.
All right, great. That's great. Okay, another question. Who are the window suppliers in Australia who provide BAL compliant systems? So, Demir, Craig, Corey.
Probably you can jump in there a little bit. Look, there's, in terms of BAL 40 and below, quite a number of manufacturers have come on board. There's any number of them that will give you a BAL 40, BAL 29, 19 and 12.5 window. There is very few window manufacturers in their own right that will give you a 1530.8.2 tested product. I only know of 2 manufacturers out there that can satisfy that, and their windows are, one is really, really expensive, and one surprisingly is actually tested and passed with a timber frame, and I worry about the timber frame. Yeah, a company from Victoria has a timber frame BAL flame zone window system, which for quite a while wasn't accepted in New South Wales, is now, but I still worry about that timber component. And probably I could expand on that if any participants wanted a bit more information in detail later on.
Yep, perfect. And I mean, we sort of touched on this variously, but yeah, someone's written how much extra will it cost to build in bushfire zones, and I guess it really depends. But Demir, from your experience, or Corey.
Yeah, maybe I can touch on it before Demir. It's really hard to quantify. It does increase the cost. If you do it with the wrong people, it can increase the costs exponentially. But if you do it with the professionals that can help guide you and give you costing along the way, know what strategies and design techniques to use to actually keep it in control, then it's a lot more of a controllable sort of outcome with your budget. So it can range. It can range a lot, from sort of 20 to 50% on your construction costs, but at times it can be using the right professional. That's what we recommend to help you with that.
Yeah. Demir, did you want to add anything in regards to maybe, I don't know, selections or size or whatever?
Yeah, I guess I might just elaborate a little bit more on what Corey was talking about, and being just a little bit smart with planning. What we like to do with our customers is just be a little bit upfront with all our costings and flexible in providing a lot of options in different, building methods and so on. So we can't get away with putting less material in there than what's required, but we can certainly try and choose a more cost-effective type of material to install, which certainly helps, lower costs and so on. So, sorry. And look, there's a lot of cost that goes beneath what you see in terms of fire rating and so on, which could be underestimated. But yeah, it's all about trying to control all those gaps to make sure those embers can't go in there. And the things that people don't really consider is the amount of, I guess, fire sealants, the angles that go in, the types of flashings that are made up. Most of the time, they're all custom bends. The plywood, yeah, maybe you need to have deeper battens because you've got some really thick insulation underneath there, which is not just your typical anti-con, but you've got your what's it called? It's made of rock wool, sorry, in there, which is pretty hard to compress. So you need to have some deeper battens. And then, yeah, you've all got those options of fire shutters or fire windows, and fire shutters are significantly cheaper than the fire windows. But yeah, it's all down to taste and how much money you've got to spend. So,
great.
Yeah.
Just one more question, and then I think we'll close up for today. Do solar panels need to be BAL FZ compliant if you're in a building in a BAL FZ area? Is that for you, Craig, maybe, or
the solar panels themselves, I don't believe need to be bushfire compliant, but the attachment process, where because you can have a penetration for the fixing, that needs to be bushfire compliant and done in the correct methodology to satisfy the requirements of 3959.
Interesting. All right, fantastic. Well, I think we'll close off for today. Thank you, panelists, again, for all the information you've provided today. It's been brilliant. I hope everyone got something really valuable out of today, and hopefully we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.